Tell me a little about your position and how you think the breakdown should be between transit and highways.
Yeah, there's something on the ballot for your viewers who don't follow this closely called the MVES dedication, otherwise known as the Vote Yes campaign. The simple thing is there's an existing tax when you buy a car, new or used. Right now only half of it goes to transportation, the other half goes into the general fund. If this passes, all the money will go to transportation, and it's an existing tax, so it's not a tax increase. It's a good thing. We're already assuming in the budget it's going to pass, so it doesn't create a hole in other parts of our budget. We need it. On full implementation, it'd be $300 million a year for transportation. To put that in context, we spend about $500 million a year currently on state highway projects, so it's a big boost in transportation funding, and it's a no-brainer. Now, there's a little bit of controversy about how much will go to transit, how much will go to roads and bridges. The way it's worded, it says at least 40% will go to transit. That has freaked out some people saying, well, they're going to spend it all on transit. Well, no legislature, no governor, specifically me, is going to allow all the money to be spent on transit. 90% of the people get around by car,
So is 40% too much? If 40% were to be spent on transit, is that too much for you? Is that balance off?
Well, given the other pots of money that we have for roads and bridges, it's probably okay. It's not ideal. It's a little rich for me in terms of how much goes to transit versus roads. I would have preferred more of a 70-30 kind of split, but we don't want to let the perfect get in the way of the good.
What do you think should be the balance between transit and roads? Can you put a percentage on it?
Well, I think the bigger issue is how do you pay for it? And I think we've become very metrocentric as a government. We're forgetting the needs of greater Minnesota. $100 million was taken out of the highway account of rural Minnesota and put in the metropolitan area, and there's no means to pay it back. And in the meantime, 2/3 of injuries occur in greater Minnesota. I believe with regard to mass transit, we ought to be establishing a metropolitan transit district. It is an issue for a metropolitan area. I don't believe that somebody in Erskine has to be paying for that. They've got their own roads, which is the lifeblood for the farmer and the lifeblood for those rural businesses. They need to keep their roads intact. The MVEST amendment, which I do support, I've also made a commitment that the 60% language, it says not more than 60 shall be paid in transportation, meaning it could be less for highways. I've made a commitment that it will be 60% for highways. I don't think that we should be selling rural Minnesota short when it comes to transportation. When it comes to mass transit, I do believe that we should set up a mass transit district or
Does that mean a metro sales tax, perhaps? Well, you don't want the guy in Erskine paying, so Roger Moe's not paying up there in Erskine, but how do you get that metro money?
The metro, what other municipalities have done, Denver, Atlanta, is they've set up a transit district. They do have the financing issue that has to be confronted. It can be by a tax, fees, you name it, but basically the people who use the system within the metropolitan area would participate in the payment for it.
We've got a situation in Minnesota today where we're being pushed inexorably toward more cars and longer trips and more trips, and it's just not going to work. And we've been delinquent, I think, in creating a funding source to actually create a system of transit. We have transit projects. We built one LRT line. We're now talking about the North Star line. We're talking about the university line, but it's not a system. It doesn't connect together yet, and that's because there's no solid base of funding.
What should the solid base of funding then be for transit?
Well, I go back to the bill that actually passed 2 years ago in the legislature, where Republicans and Democrats somehow got together and said, wow, we've got to do something differently. And in that bill, as you know, there was two 5-cent increases in the gas tax. That was aimed at the roadside, and a dedication of a piece of the sales tax for transit. So we'd actually have statewide a transit resource we could look to so we could do the planning, we could anticipate, we could think about not only the next line, but the system of lines that would actually give citizens a choice.
You mentioned dedication of funds. Tell me where you're at on the dedication of the MVES motor vehicle sales tax. In the Constitution, which voters are facing this fall.
Yeah, so those are two different questions for me.
Talk about this one specifically.
I oppose the constitutional thing. It's a legislative, gubernatorial chicken way out. I mean, you know, they could have done this last year, the year before, the year before that, the year before that, and the year before that if they'd wanted to. You don't need the people of Minnesota to authorize doing the right thing. They could have done it any time they wanted, and nobody has proposed it. But I think we should dedicate it. I feel strongly about that.
Dedicate it, but don't do it in the Constitution.
But putting it in the Constitution, well, put this differently. Forcing the people of Minnesota to do for the legislature and the governor what they could have done for themselves is just plain wrong. It's delinquent. It's dereliction of duty. I mean, If this was an important thing to do, propose it, pass it, put it in law. We could have done this any time.
And how about this MVES constitutional amendment? Do you support that?
This is one of the few opportunities that people can come together on and move transportation forward without a lot of partisan bickering or problems. And so I just would encourage people to vote yes. And I wouldn't worry about whether all the money is going to be spent on transit. It won't. 40% or so will.